Okay. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the invitation. So, indeed, European Commission. European Commission is the executive branch of the European architecture, and we work together with the Parliament, which is the legislative part, and the Council, which is the one that pay and that give money to the budget. So they are very important. So very glad to be here today and to comment on this notion of digital commons and more precisely what we are doing at the European Commission at the European level in that context. So I will spend a bit of time on what we are talking about in terms of a bit of definition, but also in terms of rationale. Why are we interested in digital commons? So commons are not new. This is as old as humanity, I would say. So at the time there was the resources, there was this notion of sharing, can be natural resources, water, can be buildings like storage house, or it can be tools like mills. So at any point of time, there was this notion of commons. This was theorized economically in the 70s. Somebody got a Nobel Prize on that. And now the latest incarnation of that is this notion of digital commons, which can be defined as, digital resources that are shared, contributed by, and governed by those that are contributing to it, to make it simple. So here you have a definition that was issued last year from the French presidency. And this is overlapping with open source. So for sure there is a large overlap, open source software. And there is a lot of software that are following this definition. There is also a lot of open source software that don't, meaning that they are centrally governed. So we are going to look and to consider this community governed open source software. This is also about open hardware, and we have a lot of action there. Open design, take an open design for a PC, for instance. You have today fully open design laptop, including open hardware, including open software, and open design. Open standards are part of it. They are shared by those that are designing that and governed by communities. This is what we call Internet Commons, so I will use this terminology afterwards. This also addresses other parts that are not necessarily linked to open source, namely open data. So at the Commission, we have a very strong open data policy. I will not discuss that, but this is certainly part of this broader picture of commons. So let's see where we come from. There are a number of angles, and they are mostly coming from the open source software perspective. But I think it's important to put that in the context why we are at the Commission focusing on that right now. There is a strategic perspective or dimension in this conversation. And I think Log4j was a waking up call for a lot of people. Including the US government. So as early as January 22, the US government, as you may know, gathered the industry to develop a plan in order to avoid this situation. And it was a wake-up call in a sense that decision makers realized at this occasion that open source software or commons were everywhere. It was mentioned several times, and they were also critical in the sense that a vulnerability and a commons that is somewhere in a package can affect the whole system. So these two characteristics are very much in line with a strategic dimension, like oil, for instance. This is critical and this is everywhere. So this is one dimension. There is also an economic or socio-economic perspective. The European Commission commissioned a study a couple of years ago, led by Fraunhofer, and they figure out that, in fact, there is a clear link between investment in open source and a growth, GDP or jobs. So this study also identify a number of critical success factors in, and I will mention one of them later. So an economic perspective and a socio-economic perspective that was identified. And there is also a geopolitical dimension. More and more open source is politicized. We have seen the US intervention, but in China there is a strong open source policy, and other regions of the world are looking at that from yes, a geopolitical perspective. There is a recent publication from the French Institute of International Relations that I recommend, and that identify or analyze these different players or regions of the world, and also highlight the difficulty when a government wants to intervene in this sector to link bottom-up strategy with something that is essentially, sorry, top-down strategy with something that is essentially bottom-up. So what those things are, there is a momentum right now across the world. In Europe, at member states level, we have, for instance, in Germany, the Sovereign Tech Fund. If you look at what they are funding, you will identify that there is a lot of critical building blocks and critical elements that are important for the German government, and they identify vulnerabilities, and they identify also work to be done to solve those criticalities. And this is a way to influence or fund progress for commons. Recently, the Linux Foundation established itself in a subsidiary here in Europe, which is a recognition of the fact that Europe is a very strong hold for open source contributors. And they recognize that, and there is figures like 1/3 of Linux Foundation contributors are from Europe. Very important, the OSPO, it was mentioned before me. There is this network of OSPO. At the Commission, we have the European Commission OSPO, which is very active and stimulating the adoption of open source. And closing the loop also with funders like us or with the contributors themselves. And there are other examples, the Digital Public Good Alliance with United Nations, UNESCO, the Norwegian, and others. More recently, this conversation was brought up at the level of the United Nations, for your information. There is this notion of the Global Digital Compact, which is a plan for the next 10 years globally, so very much aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and the United Nations is currently doing an exercise of consultation. And one of the 8 priorities, you don't see that on that screen, maybe you do, global digital commons. So this conversation is triggered from one angle, which is more the development dimension of commons, because all countries in the world can use them, organization, education, NGOs. So there is this dimension. So this is happening at the global level, and there is a momentum, I would say. So Europe is also part of this momentum. There are few elements that trigger our action. the first one that was mentioned by Deputy Latombe is the notion of sovereignty. So obviously, when you have access to the software or the hardware, when you are able to contribute to it without any permission, when you are able to take the software and to deploy it on your own terms of reference, or when you are able to check that you are not going to be locked to a provider, these are all elements of sovereignty. But the other side of the same coin, which I think is a bit more positive narrative, is the notion of trust. And mostly linked to the notion of transparency. You are able to audit the software, and then you are able to trust. And if you trust, you can do more. It's true for corporation, it's true for individuals. And you, by definition, the commons is governed by community, so there is no central control that can overnight change your terms or your jurisdiction, like happened in the past. So this is about people, this is about contributors. Europe is very rich. There is a very rich network of communities contributing. Just go to FOSDEM every year, first weekend of February at ULB in Brussels. You will see 8,000 people, 700 events, and this is a very rich population. And those people are very well aligned with something that we call European Declaration on Digital Rights and Principles, which is the guiding principles for action in the digital world, and where we are going to talk about privacy, where we are going to talk about trust, and this is very well aligned with the mindset of most of the open source contributors. And finally, there is an inner collaborative nature in Commons. Just take interoperability. If you look at Fediverse, for instance, it's a standard from W3C, so it's an open standard, it's a commons, and this allows interoperability between platforms. Let's say a video sharing platform and a microblogging platform, so they can exchange posts between one and the other, while today the existing centralized platforms, they are in silo, they don't work together. And also the notion of development, I already mentioned that in the context of United Nations. So it's a supporting, inherently a narrative of development, collaboration, cooperation, notably with the developing world or education sector. So I will now focus on what the Commission is practically doing. And this is, there are many things, but I will focus on what is called Next Generation Internet initiative. That is been around for 4 or 5 years now, and I realize this is not the slides I had initially. Anyway, and what we claim in this, it's already 4 and 5 years, so it's not new. And what we claim is that we have a unique ecosystem of very talented people that are driven by meaning and value, and that actually change the course of the internet. So ecosystem for sure, 1,000 projects funded, thousands of contributors, we don't know exactly how much, but well above 1,000. This is a very rich ecosystem. It's a very selective program, around 15, one proposal out of 7 is getting funded, so it's quite selective, so it's very talented people. And I insist on people because the way we fund is in many circumstances down to the level of individuals. So it's contracting to individual or group of individuals. A lot of SMEs also, some university, research organization, and very few corporations, to be frank. So it's really centered on people. Unique in the sense of European funding landscape. More than 80% of these contracted people, they never receive any money from Europe. So it's very complementary to other part of the program. And the people, they are very well aligned with the principles I mentioned, and they are looking at improving the internet, and they do. So they are not doing requirement analysis or paper, they are writing code. That's what they do. Yeah, and today it's 100% open source. Initially it was a bit vague, but now it's very precisely that. Right, so what are we talking about? We talk about the internet stack, and it's not something very simple. If you look at the components in any piece of modern system, it's complex. So there is a protocol stack, if you like, from bottom hardware. We have a lot of open hardware projects. The network, so VPN technology, the Tor of this world, the WireGuard, operating system, decentralized solutions, including blockchain, but not only, federated also. A lot of middleware, which is a key component for notably identity management, authentication, authorization, and up to the user side, so applications, horizontal applications. So on your right hand, you have a list of famous names in video conference, for example, Big Blue Button, Jitsi, messaging, mail technology, collaborative tools, ActivityPub, I mentioned that, WordPress, LibreOffice, etc. You can read that. On the other side, it's more inside the stack, so it's probably less visible, but it's very important. We have RISC-V project, we have open hardware, PC, Balthazar, we have open power system on the chip, VPN technology, Nixos for packaging, etc. So this is few examples. As I mentioned, there are 1,000 of them. You can check that on ngi.eu. There is a section called Discover NGI Solution, and you will have access to all this project. And if you drill down, you will go down to the GitHub or whatever repository is there. Right. So I keep saying we do that. I have to admit something. Commission has a relatively minor role, in fact, because we don't fund directly the people. We do work with intermediaries, and just after me, Michael will present is an intermediary or his company. So we give money to intermediaries, so they answer calls from Commission, so very institutional. And in turn, they take this money, and 80% goes to fund third parties, in that case, contributors to commons. And there are many reasons why we do that. Most primarily because we are not able to access those people. We don't speak the language, we don't have the culture, we don't have the tools, the instruments. So that's very necessary. There is an agility in this process because we are able to react, to have short life cycle, even though we do intermediaries, but intermediaries themselves, they are able to adapt much quicker than Commission do. For instance, we are now in OW2con'23. It was designed in 21, agreed in 22, open and evaluated in 23. Projects will start 24, and results will start coming in 25, 26. So it's very good for big projects and waterfall design. But internet is not working like that. Who knows what will happen in 5 years from now? So just as an example, we asked recently our intermediaries to put a large language model because it turns out that open source contributors are one of the key drivers there. And there are other things. We don't pretend to solve all the problems, so there are still big projects in the Commission. That's actually the vast majority. but in many circumstances, a small team of focused people can do a lot, and we know that. It's very simple to enter the program. You go to the page of the open calls from our intermediaries, and you just fill 1 page, 2 pages. Sometimes it can be even anonymous. Right, I will not go in further detail, but this is, so when I say we, it means us and intermediaries. That's what it means, and probably mostly intermediaries. So now I'm going to focus on what are our current steps, which goes along 3 lines of action. One is the funding and the creation of commons. One is to stimulate the usage, and one is to consider sustainability. Sustainability is essential because we don't want to fund forever the same development. So there must be a route for sustainability. And in that context, the role of foundation is very important. We see that in the US. Well, Linux Foundation, Apache Foundation. There are few in Europe, and this is identified as a critical element of a wealthy and successful commons ecosystem. By the way, if you look at some sources, the vast majority of open source foundations are in the US. According to one source, it's a bit more than 10% in Europe, while there are indications that 1/3 of contributors are in Europe, so there is a bit of work here. So we would like to support that and move to foundation. It can be general, it can be specialized, it doesn't really matter. Of course, it's complementary to supporting companies that have an open source business model, and there are many flavors of it. It can be consulting, integration services, it can be service, cloud-based services, hosting, it can be freemium, premium, etc. So there are examples, Docker, that was incubated in Europe, but that successfully developed in the US. But look at Nextcloud in Germany or XWiki here in France. Those are examples of a sustainable business model. So what we ask in our work program is that intermediaries, they help and support third parties, projects in their evolution, in their maturity path. So this is a route to sustainability. This is more specifically for going to a sustainable foundation model, but it's non-exclusive. And this requires a different step. It's not here so scientific, it's just our experience. But we need to be able to support projects to mature technologically, so security audits, to mature, let's say, inclusive-wise. We want people to be able to access the technology, so security, accessibility audit. It's European, so we need to have a translation. We need to have a Europeanization of the software to scale precisely. Advising, packaging, advising on the licensing scheme. And then you move up, you have a critical mass of community, and then it takes time. It's minimum 3, 5, and it can be even more. But this is certainly a privileged route to sustainability, and as I mentioned, our programs are very prescriptive on that front. Supporting the relevance, there is one dimension which is to maintain the software. The US they developed this fund for securing the supply chain. Here we have a small action, 1.5 million, the tech review, NGI tech review. And this is for helping doing security audits and other things to existing NGI projects. And there is also this notion of relevance. The internet, the standards is evolving every day, and the software needs to be up to date. And there are, for instance, having an extension to ActivityPub, having an extension to interoperate with a messaging system. So those things are solid. You see solid from WC3. You see Cyan for replacing BGP. So there are evolution. And naturally, inside NGI, we are funding, and actually that's the majority of projects that are existing. And here I give some examples. And add feature. It's a feature aligned with the notion and the principles that I mentioned before. So a human-centric internet and protecting privacy and sharing collaboration. So we fund CryptPad, for instance, extension features. Jitsi, we had securing crypto for their messaging. And we fund here in France Framasoft, I mentioned here PeerTube. So this is, I would say, a big chunk of our funding. We want also to push the technology towards users. So this year we had a 14 million euro piloting call that precisely take the NGI technologies, and you see there is a huge catalog, and deploy that in verticals. So the call is closed. We have even evaluated it. So there is no opportunity short term for companies or for adopters of technology. But this is just to show you that we also want to stimulate usage through funding. So that's the three elements that we are doing. We have now, for this year, we will have 27 million euro in one single project that is going to be awarded in this summer. And this will be the biggest funding effort that we have done for stimulating commons. We have the 14 million euro for the pilots. We have a collaboration with the United States, and we have also a support action that I will mention. So this is the current effort, and those projects will start later this year and early next year, and that will constitute our main commission input to this digital commons policy. One word to say that we are not alone. Member states in Europe, they have a very interested interest. They have a lot of interest in commons. Last year, the French presidency, under the leadership of Mr. Verdier, Ambassador Verdier, put together a plan or a recommendation for stimulating the digital commons. They issue a report. I encourage you to read it. And more recently, they get together and they plan to. I mean, it was well summarized by Ivan Bartos, which was under the Czech presidency, saying that this needs to be institutionalized. So with that, I will conclude provisionally, because it's a very moving target. You've seen there is a United Nations, there is effort at member state level, commission level. Our experience is that there is a gap, and that was mentioned by Député Latombe with the CRA. Between decision makers and the contributors, there is a gap, and it's not obvious how to bridge this gap. That's why we have also a 2 million euros policy support action that is going to be awarded also this year. That will precisely try to represent this community, to push their message towards the policymaker. But at the end, it's commons, so it's people contributing to commons, and there must be a way to institutionalize and to organize this dialogue between the top and the bottom. And it's not easy. Our experience, it's not easy. The fact that we are funding 27 million euro itself is a strategic move. It's a strategic action. But there are other organizations, member states interested, and our message here is: do not reinvent the wheel, because it's not easy to do this job. We know in the past there were a lot of top-down initiatives that didn't success, and here you need to understand if you have the critical mass of talents on the one hand, and to be sure that the top-down message is aligned with what is the motivation of those people. And we don't want to address 0.1 or 0.1% of the population that wants to avoid the GAFAM and have their own open hardware. No, we don't want to be the next Google, that's for sure, and we don't want to fund state surveillance. So there is a tedious third route, third path, which I think is, there is a momentum here, is this notion that, think about Twitter, so a central system can overnight change the rules. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't like it. Think about deepfake. It's a question of time before you see on your screen a parent or a kid that is begging for money and you don't know if it's genuine or not. Same with large language models. You don't know if it's human generated, if it's not, if it's mixed. So this notion of genuinity, authenticity is essential when you want to trust your digital experience. And there is an opportunity because this world is moving toward a more immersive digital experience. And that's where this community have a card to play and increase the trust through trust models that can work and scale. With that, I will stop because I think I'm over. Thank you.